Hello! Today we are going to be going over 2.3, which is absolute values of rational numbers. So our learning intention says, today we will learn how to find and interpret absolute value. And so, remember, we'll fill the learning intention in at the end, so be thinking about how we may use this in the real world throughout the lesson. So the absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on a number line. So over here on my little number line, it says the absolute value of -5 is written as absolute value of -5. So it has those lines. That is how you write absolute value. Okay? So anything that is inside those lines comes out as a positive. Okay? And so even if it's a positive right now, it goes in to those lines as a positive, and if it's a negative, it goes into those lines as a negative, but when it comes out of those lines, it is a positive. And that shows you it here, okay? Because all absolute value is the distance from 0. So if we're thinking about the distance from Hays to Salina, it's like 90 to 100 miles, somewhere around there. Okay? We don't say, oh, we're -90 miles from Salina. We just say we're 90 miles from Salina. So distance is always positive. Absolute value is always positive. Okay? So I want you to keep in mind these examples. Okay? A lot of students get this mixed up and they say it means the opposite, but that's not true because the absolute value of +5 is a +5. It's not a negative. So when you see those lines, I want you to automatically think positive number. Okay? Because distance is always positive. So like I said, we don't say, oh, we're -10 feet from something, or you need to stand -4 feet away from me. It's always just stand 4 feet away, or we're 10 feet from there, 7 miles. Distance is always positive. Okay? So these questions are going to make you think, okay? So you got to use your brain on these. So example 1, we're going to describe quantities using absolute value. So stock prices rise and fall during the year. The table shows the overall change in the price of a company's stock from year to year. During which 2 years was the overall change in the stock price the greatest? So it's not asking which one increased the most or which one decreased the most. It's asking during which 2 years was the overall change in the stock price the greatest. So we want to find the absolute value of all 4 of these. So the change in 2015, the change in price was 11. And so that the absolute value of 11 is +11. The absolute value of 19 is +19. The absolute value of -34 is +34. And the absolute value of 6 is 6. So it says, which 2 years was the overall change in the stock price the greatest? Well, that would be 2013 and 2014. So those are the 2 years we're going to write down, 2013 and 2014. So even though 2013, the change was a negative, it's just asking which one had the overall change was the greatest. And that would be because it went down 34, in 2014 it went up 19. Those are the 2 greatest changes, no matter if they're negative or positive, because we find the absolute value of them. So on this one, it says the students in a science class recorded the change in the water level of a local river. During which week did the water level change by the greatest amount? So it's not asking which one changes the greatest or which one had the greatest amount. It's asking which water level changed by the greatest amount. So whether it's positive or negative, we have to find the absolute value. So the absolute value of -7.5 is +7.5. The absolute value of 2 2/10 is a +2 2/10. And then the absolute value of -4 38/100 is a +4 38/100. So which week did the water level change by the greatest amount? That would be week 1, because 7.5 is greater than 2 2/10 and 4 38/100. So it would be week 1. had the greatest amount of change. All right, on this next one, so we're finding the absolute value of each. So this first one, we have -4, which is right there. Remember, absolute value is the distance from 0. So to go from -4 to 0, that would just be 4 units from 0. So it'd be a +4. Now, the distance from 0 to 0 is just 0. And remember, 0 cannot be positive or negative. It's just 0. So the absolute value of 0 is just 0. And then the absolute value of a +3, which starts there, well, the distance from 3 to 0 on a number line is just 3. So it would be a +3, because that's the distance from 0. Remember, it's not the opposite. If we're talking about absolute value, it's always positive. All right. Example 3 says interpret absolute value. So negative numbers sometimes represent debts. Yasmin is a business owner. The table shows 3 account balances that represent her gallery's debts. Which account has the least balance and which account has the greatest debt? So when we look at these, I'm going to find the absolute value of each. So the absolute value of each just makes each of them positive. So this one would be positive 35 and 42 cents. This one would be positive $50.99. And then this last one would be positive $12.75. So now it's saying which account has the least balance. So the least balance, okay, these are kind of tricky. So let me skip A real quick. Okay, so for B, it says which account has the greatest debt. So that one is which one owes the most money. Well, that would be account B because it's farthest from 0 and it's in debt $50.99. So for the greatest debt, that would be account B. Okay, that's the one that has the most money that you have to pay back. Okay. So then, which account has the least balance? That one would also be B, okay, because we're trying to get to 0, and the least balance is the one that's going to be farthest from 0. It's the farthest away from 0. Okay, so both of those would be B. They're just worded differently. All right. Flip the page over. Okay, I know that one can be tricky with the wording, but on these next ones, all we're doing is ordering the numbers from least to greatest. They're a lot of them are absolute values, so remember you have to change them and find the absolute value of them first. So I always rewrite them to make it a little easier. So the absolute value of +5 is +5. The absolute value of -12 is +12. Absolute value of 0 is 0. And the absolute value of -7 is a +7. So now that I did that, now I can put them in order. Okay. I'm still going to use the absolute value lines. This just shows me what order I can go in. I can easily look at them. So the smallest one, or we're going to start with 0 because they're all positives except 0. So I'm going to do absolute value of 0. And then the 5 would go next. So we'll do the absolute value of 5. And then 7 would be next. So the absolute value of -7. And then the absolute value of -12 would go last. So it would look like that. All right, on this next one, we have the absolute value of -20, the absolute value of -10, the absolute value of -22 and 5/10, and the absolute value of -4 and 6/10. So the first thing I'm going to do, since I got to find the absolute value of all of them, is write that out. So the absolute value of -20 is +20. Absolute value of -10 is 10. Absolute value of -22 and 5/10 is +22 and 5/10. Then the absolute value of -4 and 6/10 is positive 4 6/10. Now, put them in order from least to greatest. So we want the number that's closest to 0, since we're dealing with all positives, to go first. So 4 6/10 is closest to 0 on the positive side, so that's going to go first. So I'm going to write the absolute value of negative 4 6/10. And if it's easier for you to cross them off, I highly recommend that as you go. And then next would be 10. So I'm going to put the absolute value of negative 10. Cross that off. Then the absolute value of negative 20 would be next. Cross that off. And then our last one is the absolute value of negative 22 5/10. And I'll cross that one off, and that's my last one. All right. On this one, or actually on the next two, I want you to pause the video and try them on your own, and then you can fast forward to see if you got it right. And if you didn't, then you can rewind to see what you missed, what you did wrong. Okay? So go ahead and pause the video here. All right. So pay attention on this one, because this negative 1, there's no lines around it. It's not the absolute value, okay? Because this line goes for the negative 2, and this one goes for the negative 1.5. So there's no absolute values of the negative 1 or the negative 3 or the 0, so those will all just stay the same. But this one, the absolute value of negative 2 is a positive 2, and the absolute value of negative 1.5 is positive 1.5. The other ones stay the same. So I'm going to look at just my negatives right now. So my negatives are negative 1 and negative 3. Okay. When we're looking at negatives, we want the farthest number from 0 to be first. So I'm going to put negative 3 first, and then negative 1. I'll cross them off. And then I'm going to put my 0, because the 0 should always separate the positives and the negatives. So then I look at my positives. So I have 1 5/10 and I have a 2. Well, I want what's closest to 0, 1 5/10. So I'm going to put the absolute value of negative 1 5/10, and then the absolute value of negative 2. So it would look like that. So make sure you're paying attention to which ones we're finding the absolute value for and which ones we're not. Last question. So these all have the absolute value. So I need to change all of them, or find the absolute value of each of them. So the absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. Absolute value of negative 3.5 is positive 3.5. The absolute value of negative 3 4/5 is positive 3 4/5. Absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4. And then the absolute value of negative 3 is a positive 3. So now that I have my positive numbers, okay, they're all positives, which means that I don't have to deal with the negatives at all. So now I just put them in order from least to greatest. Okay. So 3 would be the smallest, because that's the one that's closest to 0. So I'm going to put absolute value of negative 3, cross it off. And then, okay, this is where it gets a little tricky. We have 3.5 and 3 4/5. So those are going to come before we get to the 4. Okay, because 3.5 and 3 4/5 are between 3 and 4. So I'm going to put my 3.5, because that's closer to 0 than 3 4/5 is. So I'm going to put absolute value of negative 3.5, and then the absolute value of negative 3 4/5. And then we would have 4 and 5 left over. And so we just do that one like normal. It would go the absolute value of negative 4, and then the absolute value of negative 5. Okay. Let me know if you guys have questions. I'm trying to end this before the bell rings, so I don't have time for the learning intention. Sorry.